All right, welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking TCU women's basketball. They're heading into the Big 12 tournament.
Right.
And they finished the season with a perfect home record.
Wow.
Which is a first in their program's history.
First time ever.
So we've got some really interesting analysis, actually, from Court Time Chronicles.
Okay.
It's a podcast that really gets into the nitty-gritty of the Big 12.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff from them.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of teams can protect their home court.
Yeah.
But TCU, they took it to another level this year.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't just winning at home. They were straight up dominating their opponents.
Yeah.
Like, take their last home game against Houston, for example. They just blew them out of the water, 85-60.
Yeah, that Houston game was a clinic.
Uh-huh.
Court Time Chronicles pointed out that they were shooting over 50% from the field.
Oh, wow.
They were forcing 18 turnovers, and they turned those turnovers into 28 points. Coach Pebley even said it was a total team effort, which leads me to something I found really interesting.
Oh, okay. The team effort. Yeah, it's key here. You know, a lot of people talk about TCU's depth. And while that's important, it's more nuanced than just having a bunch of bench players.
Okay.
Their style of play really emphasizes, seamless substitutions.
I see.
So they constantly bring in fresh legs and it doesn't disrupt their flow.
So it's not just about the number of players, it's about how those players fit into their system.
Exactly. For example, you've got players like Tomi Taiwo coming off the bench, and she can just immediately contribute with her aggressive drives to the basket and her ability to knock down the three. It's almost as if their starters and bench players are interchangeable. Which makes them incredibly difficult to defend.
So opponents can't just focus on shutting down one or two key players because TCU can hurt you from so many different angles.
Precisely. And when you combine that depth with the star power they have in players like Jordan Moore and Celeste Taylor, it makes them a real threat.
Right. Jordan Moore, that senior forward, is a double-double machine. Against Houston, she had 22 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks.
Wow.
And Celeste Taylor, she's the definition of a floor general. 18 points and 8 assists against Houston, showing off her incredible court vision and ability to create for her teammates.
And that's what makes TCU so dangerous. You've got these standout players, but they're not reliant on them to win. You know, they've got a system in place that allows everyone to contribute, and that makes them very difficult to prepare for.
Okay, so we've established that TCU is the real deal. They've got the talent, the depth, and the system to compete with anyone. But now they're heading into the Big 12 tournament. And as we all know, tournament play is a different beast.
Absolutely. The regular season's a marathon. The tournament's a sprint. Every possession matters. The pressure's amplified. And any team can have a breakout performance on any given night.
Speaking of the tournament, TCU finished second in the regular season, which is huge.
Yeah.
That likely secures them a top 2 seed and something called a double bye.
Ah, yes. The double bye. For our listener who may not be familiar with tournament jargon, a double bye means TCU automatically skips the first 2 rounds of the tournament. They get to sit back, watch the other teams battle it out, and then come in fresh for the quarterfinals. It's a significant advantage.
Wow, so they get to rest up, scout their potential opponents, and avoid those early upsets that can derail a team's championship hopes. That's a huge plus for TCU.
It is. But let's not forget about the other contenders in this tournament. The Big 12 is loaded with talent, and any team can make a run.
Right. You've got Baylor, who's known for their suffocating defense. They can make life miserable for any team on the offensive end.
Oh, yeah.
You have Iowa State with their star point guard, Emily Ryan, who's the conference's leading scorer, and a true game changer.
For sure. And let's not forget about Oklahoma, whose offensive firepower can be absolutely overwhelming. They have the ability to just light up the scoreboard against anyone. And here's the kicker. There are 7 Big 12 teams ranked or receiving votes in the national polls. That's nearly the entire conference.
That's insane. So basically, TCU is entering a tournament where almost every opponent is a legitimate threat to win it all.
It's going to be a wild ride, that's for sure.
Local analyst Sarah Gibbs, someone who really knows the Big 12 inside and out, said that TCU's home record is a huge confidence boost, but also cautioned that the tournament is a different beast. What do you think she meant by that?
Well, I think Gibbs is acknowledging that while TCU has been dominant at home, the tournament atmosphere is different.
Right.
The stakes are higher, the crowds are more intense, and teams tend to elevate their game.
Yeah.
TCU's regular season success is great, but it doesn't guarantee anything once the tournament tips off.
Right. They're going to have to prove themselves all over again on a neutral court
Yeah.
against the best competition in the conference. That's what makes this so exciting.
Exactly. And here's where the depth we talked about earlier could really come into play. In a tournament setting, where games are played on back-to-back days, having fresh legs and a variety of scoring options becomes even more crucial.
So could TCU's depth be the X factor? That separates them from the pack and allows them to make a deep run in the tournament.
It's certainly possible, but of course it's not just about depth. It's about how they match up against specific opponents, how they handle the pressure, and frankly, a little bit of luck.
There's always that element of luck in tournament play, isn't there?
Yeah.
One bad shooting night, a key injury, a questionable call by the referees. Anything can change the course of a game or even the entire tournament.
Absolutely, and that's what keeps us all on the edge of our seats, right? The unpredictability, the potential for upsets, the chance to see history being made.
Okay, so we've talked about TCU's strengths, their perfect home record, the unique advantage of their depth, and the challenges they'll face in this loaded Big 12 tournament. But before we move on
Oh,
to the potential Cinderella stories and break down some key matchups, let's take a quick step back and make sure our listener is fully up to speed.
good point. Let's recap what we've learned so far about TCU and their chances in the Big 12 tournament. So we've established TCU, they're a force. A perfect home record, balanced attack, and that depth makes them tough to defend.
Yeah, we talked about it. They got that double bye,
Yeah.
which gives them a little bit of breathing room
Yeah.
before they go into the quarterfinals. But we also can't forget that they're entering a tournament where almost every opponent is nationally ranked.
Right. We talked about the challenges.
Oh, yeah.
Baylor's defense, Iowa State with Emily Ryan in their offense,
Yeah.
and Oklahoma's explosive scoring. But let's talk about some of the other teams that could shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about those potential Cinderella stories. You know those teams that may not be at the top of the bracket, but could definitely pull off an upset. We mentioned West Virginia and Texas Tech earlier. What makes them dangerous in this tournament?
Well, they've both got that nothing to lose mentality, and that can be really dangerous in a single elimination tournament. And they've also shown that they can hang with the big dogs. West Virginia, for example, has a really disruptive defense.
Oh, okay.
They force a lot of turnovers, creates opportunities for easy baskets. They actually beat Baylor earlier this season.
Wow.
So they've proven they can take down one of the top teams.
So West Virginia's defense could be the key to their success in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. If they can disrupt the flow of teams like TCU or Iowa State,
Yeah.
who rely on, crisp ball movement and offensive execution, they could definitely cause some chaos in the bracket.
And what about Texas Tech? What's their X factor?
Texas Tech, they have a few players who can get hot from three-point range. They've had games where they just rain threes on their opponents. And if they can find that shooting rhythm in the tournament, watch out. They could upset a higher seed that's having an off night shooting.
So if you're a team like Baylor or Iowa State, you can't afford to underestimate these underdog teams. They might be lower seeds, but they have the potential to make a serious run if things break their way.
Right, and that's what's so captivating about March Madness, right?
Yeah.
The possibility of upsets, the Cinderella stories, the moments that make you jump out of your seat.
Oh, yeah.
Like, did that just happen?
It's true. You can't just look at the top seeds and assume they're going to cruise to the championship. Any team can catch fire and change the entire narrative of the tournament.
Okay, let's circle back to TCU for a second. We've talked about their strengths, but every team has vulnerabilities, right? What are some things that might trip them up in the tournament?
That's a good question. While their depth is a huge advantage, it also means that their scoring can be kind of balanced. They don't necessarily have that one go-to player they can rely on in crunch time to take over a game.
Right, yeah, in a close game. Against a team like Baylor with a strong defensive presence, they might miss having that one player who can consistently create their own shot.
Yeah, that's something to keep an eye on as the tournament progresses
Yeah.
and the competition gets tougher. How do you think TCU matches up against Baylor specifically? Because that seems like a potential clash of styles. TCU with their balanced attack and Baylor with their lockdown defense.
That would be a fascinating matchup. Baylor's defense is all about pressure, forcing turnovers, and making opponents uncomfortable. But TCU's system is designed to handle pressure. They move the ball well, they have multiple players who can handle the ball, and they're not afraid to attack the basket.
So it could come down to which team executes their game plan more effectively? Can TCU withstand Baylor's defensive pressure and find ways to score consistently? Or can Baylor disrupt TCU's flow and force them into making mistakes.
Exactly, and that's where coaching comes into play.
Okay.
How will Coach Pebley adjust her game plan to counter Baylor's strengths? Can she exploit any potential weaknesses in their defense?
It's like a chess match between coaches, each one trying to outmaneuver the other.
It is, and sometimes the adjustments made during a game can be just as important as the game plan itself. It's about recognizing what's working and what's not, and then making those in-game adjustments to counter what your opponent is doing.
And remember, it's not just about the coaches. Players need to step up and make big plays, especially in those pressure-packed tournament games. We've already talked about Jordan Moore and Celeste Taylor for TCU, but who are some other players to watch on those other contending teams?
Well, on Baylor, you got to keep an eye on Sarah Andrews. She's a dynamic guard, can score at all 3 levels. She's also a tough defender and a leader on the court. For Iowa State, Ashley Jones is a player who can take over a game. She's a versatile forward who can score inside and out, rebound and defend.
Okay.
And for Oklahoma, Maddie Williams is a force to be reckoned with. She's a strong, physical player, attacks the basket relentlessly. She's also a good rebounder and defender.
So it sounds like each of those players could be the difference maker for their respective teams if they're playing at their best. It's going to be tough for anyone to stop them.
Absolutely. And don't forget, there are also those under-the-radar players who could emerge as stars in the tournament. The players who might not be household names, but have the potential to have a breakout performance on the big stage.
That's what makes March Madness so unpredictable and exciting. You never know who's going to step up and become the hero of the tournament.
Speaking of upsets and potential heroes, are there any other underdog teams we haven't mentioned that you think could make some noise in the tournament? Well, one team that comes to mind is Kansas State. They've been a bit inconsistent this season, but they have some talented players, including Ayoka Lee, who is a dominant force in the paint.
Oh, hey.
If she can stay out of foul trouble and play at her best, they could be a tough out for any team.
Interesting. So they have that one go-to player in Ayoka Lee that TCU might be lacking. But like you said, it all depends on whether she can stay on the court and be effective. It's all about matchups, isn't it? How one team's strengths and weaknesses line up against their opponent.
Exactly. And that's why it's so difficult to predict what's going to happen in the tournament. You can analyze the matchups, look at the stats, but ultimately it comes down to who shows up and plays their best basketball when it matters most.
Yeah, it really feels like anyone's game this year. So many talented teams, so many potential storylines. And like you said, it really comes down to who's playing their best basketball when it matters most.
Right, and that's what makes it so great for us fans. You know, you can throw out the records, the rankings, all that stuff goes out the window. Anything can happen in March.
So, for our listener who's maybe getting ready to fill out their bracket, or just wants to know who they should watch closely, what are some of the key things you'll be looking for as this tournament unfolds?
Well, for me, it's all about those matchups and, you know, how they play out in that high-pressure environment. We talked about TCU's balanced attack going up against Baylor's defense. But I'm also interested to see how Iowa State's Emily Ryan handles the pressure. You know, she's been incredible all season. But can she keep that up when every possession feels magnified?
It's almost like the tournament is a test of a player's mental toughness as much as their physical skills.
Yeah.
You know, can they stay composed when the game's on the line? Can they make the right decisions when the pressure's at its peak?
Right, and that's where experience can be a factor. You know, teams with a lot of seniors who have been through the battles of tournament play, they might have an edge in those close games. But then again, sometimes it's the young, fearless players who actually thrive under pressure and make a name for themselves.
Speaking of young players, are there any under-the-radar players, maybe freshmen or sophomores, who you think could have a breakout tournament?
You know, one player I'm really intrigued by is Oklahoma State's Lexi Keys. She's a sophomore guard, and she's shown flashes of brilliance this season. You know, she's got a smooth stroke from three-point range. She's not afraid to attack the basket. If she can find her rhythm in the tournament, she could be a real difference maker for Oklahoma State.
It's funny how a player can just explode onto the scene during the tournament, and all of a sudden everyone knows their name. It can be a career-defining moment for some of these young players.
Absolutely. And sometimes, you know, those breakout performances can really change the trajectory of a program.
Thinking back to TCU, I keep coming back to their depth and how that might play out. Over the course of the tournament, do you think their depth will ultimately be a significant advantage? Or could it potentially backfire?
That's a great question. In theory, having fresh legs and multiple scoring options should be a huge benefit.
Yeah.
Especially if they make a deep run and games are being played on back-to-back days. But It also depends on how Coach Pebley manages her rotations. If she's constantly shuffling players in and out, it could disrupt their chemistry and flow.
It's a delicate balance
Yeah.
between utilizing their depth
Hmm.
and maintaining that team chemistry.
Right. It'll be interesting to see how Coach Pebley adjusts her strategy based on, their opponents and the game situation.
As we wrap up our deep dive here
Mhm.
into TCU women's basketball and the upcoming Big 12 tournament, I have to ask, what's the one thing that you personally are going to be watching most closely?
For me, it's all about the intangible factors. The momentum shifts, the energy in the arena, how teams respond to adversity. You can analyze the matchups, you can look at the stats, but a lot of times it's those intangible factors that really determine the outcome.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that you can't really quantify or predict, but it's what makes sports so unpredictable and so compelling to watch. It's that human element. It's that emotional roller coaster of competition.
Exactly. And for our listener, as you watch this tournament unfold, I want you to pay attention to those little things too. Notice how the crowd reacts to a big shot. Watch the body language of the players on the bench. Listen to the tone of the announcers. Those subtle cues can tell you just as much about the game as the box score.
I love that. It's about going beyond just the basic stats and really immersing yourself in the experience, feeling the energy of the moment.
Right. And most importantly, have fun with it. March Madness is a time for upsets, buzzer beaters, those unforgettable moments. Embrace the chaos. Enjoy the ride. And see where it takes you.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. We covered a lot of ground today, explored TCU's journey, analyzed the key matchups, and hopefully gave our listener plenty to think about as they watch this tournament unfold.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, anything can happen, so buckle up and enjoy the ride.